All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined by my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Great, happy to be here, Al.
Yes, and the boss is back, Kevin McElvaney, joining us to talk WrestleMania and some other stuff. How's it going?
Sorry, everybody. If you had enough of me last month or whenever I made all the appearances.
Yeah. Well, obviously, so much to talk about. Kevin and I we're both at WrestleMania, and we'll be talking about that and so much more. Trying something new here with my my kid's green screen, so I'm not actually standing in front of a giant PWI.
I thought maybe you'd gotten the one that Mustafa Ali brought out.
Yeah, I was wondering that. Yes,
gift from Mustafa. Anyhow, a lot to cover. Obviously, WrestleMania. You know, fair to say, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, certainly if you ask Triple H, the biggest WrestleMania of all time. We have a finish to the story, and so we'll talk about all that. I think, I mean, a little bit of a preview. The greatest night of WWE I've ever seen, a Sunday night, which is, I know, high praise, but I think accurate. And before that, we'll actually talk a little AEW. I never would have thought we'd be talking AEW this week, but they managed to insert themselves in the story for all the wrong reasons. And I'm sure we have a lot of things to say. So we will discuss all that. But real quick, let's tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated behind me. And here's the actual size one. Mustafa Ali on the cover, a really fun feature I got to put together talking to Mustafa. We're going to have the audio here shortly, maybe as a separate. I was texting with him yesterday, and he's cool with it, so we'll do that, and so much more. Kevin, what should people know about this issue?
Yes, I mean, the Mustafa feature is great. There's a special photo shoot that actually Basil Mahmoud did for us, and he is the TNA photographer, but this was something we had in the works with him even before we knew that Mustafa Ali would be, you know, in TNA. So it was a pretty cool thing to have set up this like campaign photo shoot. There's some extras in it.
Great photos. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a lot of fun. And, you know, apart from that, we have another feature story in there that I wrote about Chazza McKenzie, who basically just bet on herself in a way where she had to go and secure her own independent wrestler's visa from Australia to the US, which is a process. And it's very difficult to do to get any kind of independent work visa in the U.S. So we talked to her, and there's a special photo shoot, kind of a behind-the-scenes day in the life thing with her. A lot of other great stuff in there. Karen Peterson spoke with we'll call them the Reiwa Four. So it was the dubbed 3 Reiwa Musketeers from New Japan, who were a recent dojo class, plus Yuya Uemura, who you may remember from TNA and some other places. Just a good look at kind of what that company is going to potentially develop into in the next few years. Good feature from Scott Fishman looking at the impact of injuries, how they shaped everything from the WrestleMania build to the careers of independent wrestlers. Just a lot of really cool stuff in the issue. I think it's a great one to pick up, and it'll be out on newsstands next Tuesday in the U.S.
Yep. It reminds me of something, and we'll get more into, you know, how wrestling is doing and how WWE is doing. But I had a first the other day going to my local supermarket. PWI was at the cashier.
Wow.
I've never seen before, and it was next to another wrestling magazine that's like, I guess, a one-off from like the people that make Star, but just
the Champions of Wrestling,
is fascinating. But you know, they have their magazine rack in the back of the supermarket, and I often find PWI there, but it's the first time I saw it over there. It was like the prime real estate. So, you know, it's
wrestling is hot right now. That's
it is.
Yeah. I mentioned that the Tony Storm cover, I think I mentioned to you guys, I saw it at my supermarket. It was in the magazine section, but it was featured. You know, it wasn't just stacked up. It was featured, and it was next to like one of those Time Life things on Elvis, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe it's because she looked a lot like an old movie star or something, you know? So they just put her next to Elvis. But I mean, like, what, you know, so covers make a difference too. But it was so amazing to see that. I was just blown away.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember back in 96, it was little things like this that told me like something is going on, like walking around a mall and seeing people with wrestling t-shirts and thinking like, wow, that's crazy, and it definitely feels like that now. It does feel like the beginning or maybe right in the middle of a boom period. So anyhow, don't miss out. Subscribe to PWI. Yes, we're still around. I was chatting with a guy at night 2 of WrestleMania in the parking lot, tailgating, who ended up helping me get out of there when I had some trouble with my car. His name is Bill. Hi, Bill. Thank you for the help. I appreciate it. Told him I'd shout him out. But another one of these guys. Oh, is PWI still around? and
This is Bill Apter.
Yeah,
I ran into a Wawa yesterday, by the way.
Oh, really?
I never run into him, and we live pretty close. But
I saw that a local news there in Philly did a whole thing on him visiting Apter's Alley and all that stuff, which is cool. So anyhow, head on over to PWI-online.com. I imagine before long we'll have our own WrestleMania coverage. I don't know what we've got planned, but I'm sure something is in the works. For the moment, don't miss this out. I imagine before long we're going to be talking PWI 500 and everything else. We get back into as the weather gets nicer, the work gets harder at PWI. Yeah. So anyhow, don't miss out on any of it. Again, head on over to PWI-online.com. Subscribe. It's the way to go. Get a deep discount over the cover. So a lot to talk about. I don't know where to begin. Real quick, just in terms of like experience, Kevin, how was your weekend? How's the WrestleMania press box? I didn't get to go in there.
Oh yeah, it was very nice. So I did not end up attending both nights in person, and part of that is because I ran my own charity independent wrestling event over across the bridge in New Jersey at the H2O Wrestling Center on Saturday. My intention was always to go both nights, but it was just I couldn't do it. So I watched from the comfort of my home and kind of went to sleep right after the show was over. But the press box is terrific. Yeah, there was good food. CM Punk would approve. There was Pepsi on tap. Yeah. More importantly, I think
that no good CM Punk.
Right. No. But I more importantly, there was hot tea, which I'm still struggling with these sinus issues that go back a couple of weeks at this point. We're not made any better by attending all these events, and some of them in very muggy, not very well ventilated rooms. But it was good. No, it was just really cool atmosphere. It was the weather was slightly better on Sunday, so that was nice. And it was a good group. I mean, very full in the press box for sure.
Yeah, I heard some issues with the press conference, which didn't look like it had a whole bunch of sort of diversity of reporters. And I've heard some of this was just a mix-up. And then there's also kind of conspiracy theories that maybe WWE is being more selective about who they let in and, wanting the friendlier questions.
Well, they rejected me, so that settles it.
Yeah. And there was a whole thing about PW Insider and Mike Johnson. I guess he's saying it was just kind of a mix-up, but, they couldn't have gotten I guess I shouldn't say it's about anybody, but not everything was a softball, but also, nothing too hard hitting either. And these press conferences are always sort of fraught anyway. So I actually don't blame them for doing it that way. Why would you want to take real questions?
Yeah, there was something that rubbed me the wrong way with that, and I'm all for protecting the business and all that stuff and staying in character and not going. But I feel like they walk such a line with these press conferences, and it's almost like you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it's because I'm in their shoes. Or I'm a reporter. I'm a journalist. I thought that what Roman Reigns did there was going over the line. I thought going too far. But he was in character, but sort of like bullying the reporters into acknowledging him in character. And I don't know if it was a shoot or not, but having somebody removed because they wouldn't do it. I get it. You're full tilt. You're doing your thing, but I felt like that was unprofessional and going too far. And again, I don't know how much reality there was to it. I wasn't there, but it just felt yucky to me,
The three of us were at the AEW one together at the Coliseum a couple months back for the World's End, whatever it was called. And I remember just cringing over the Tony Storm stuff, and the reporters playing along. And what did she want? She wanted like New Year's resolutions from everybody, and everybody had to give a New Year's resolution before asking their question
Yeah,
or
this was worse
something.
than that though, because this really
Yeah, but
felt
just
like
all, but it's just it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
right.
As a spectator watching, um, it can be insightful sometimes. Roman talking about his leukemia was really interesting. I thought The Rock on night one dropped a little bit of a spoiler on night two. He all but said, when Cody finishes his story tomorrow night, something like that. So they're interesting, but it's pro wrestling. I don't think it's the right. Maybe you send Triple H out there to kind of give his debrief, and that's it. But it's just super problematic. And yeah, we'll talk more about WrestleMania in a moment. We did want to begin with AEW stuff, which I wouldn't have thought that we would this week, but again, they kind of made themselves part of the story yesterday. I try to be diplomatic about these things, but I don't think there's any way to say it. I mean, I thought humiliating, pathetic, desperate. Coming off of what was one of, if not the greatest weekend for WWE, in terms of business metrics, and also just in terms of, like, again, we're talking about there being a boon. It's a really good time for WWE. They're riding a high. I thought it was almost the inverse for AEW. I thought it was an absolute low point. What I saw last night on AEW, not just the Punk stuff, which is most of it, but then the follow up with Will Ospreay and some other stuff. You could even quibble about putting Dustin Rhodes in the main event, which is just timing wise, it's so bizarre. But let's talk about the decision to air the backstage footage from All Out. And the genesis of this is Punk appears on Ariel Helwani's podcast a couple weeks ago promoting WrestleMania, is asked about what happened backstage, gives his version of events. I didn't think he said anything all that inflammatory. I mean, he just sort of said it the way I thought. The most damning thing that he said about AEW went and confirmed last night, which is that, he said Tony Khan, perfectly nice guy. He's not a boss, and AEW is not about making money. That is not, and that's what I saw last night. I would have to go back to kind of like the WCW 1999 2000s as far as a just really desperate a ploy for viewership. And at least the WCW was more transparent about it. For them to do that and then do it under the guise of this is somehow advancing the storyline was just pathetic. There's no other way to say it. It was embarrassing watching that last night. What did you think, Brian?
Oh boy, I don't know. And now over to you, Brian. I think it's depressing. Like, that's the best way I could describe it. Like, I almost am uncomfortable talking about it because I am somebody, and I think many wrestling fans are, who have really wanted to be in AEW's corner, and in the beginning really so excited, and also definitely times when I felt like they were on the right course to become the industry leader. You know what I mean? Like, really, and we used to talk about it on the show here. So when you see things like this, it's like, I don't know, the Tony Schiavone picture that a lot of people have been posting is really, I think, that's everybody. Like, Tony Schiavone is everybody right now, where he's got his head in his hand, and it's almost like he's trying to shrink into as small a size as he can so the teacher won't pick on him, like that kind of thing. That's it. I mean, I don't see what the benefit of doing it was. I can even imagine how there's probably a lot of people there who feel that way, who are sort of, scratching their heads and thinking, oh my God, now we have to relitigate this whole thing again. Because here's the thing. This is a response to people who were saying, well, why is it okay for Punk to go? He's still crying about this, and now they're going to respond. Well, there's a lot of differences here. One being that CM Punk was asked questions by a reporter, and he responded to the questions in as diplomatic a way as he could. Now, of course, I'm under no illusions that he didn't anticipate everything he was going to be asked about and talked about in the interview, and he had to be okay with that. Fine. But it was still an interview. He could have said, no, I don't want to talk about this. You know, it was an interview. He was asked questions. It was also a podcast, a talk show, whatever you want to call it, out of character. That's very different from building it into your TV show and making it part of the storylines and the angles and putting it in front of a much more kind of, mainstream, for as mainstream as AEW is, but like fans that just want to turn on the show and watch AEW wrestling, as opposed to people tuning into Ariel Helwani's MMA Hour to listen to these kind of conversations. It's very, very different. It's a very different thing. And so, this response was so completely unnecessary. If you want to respond to it the same way, get it on a platform like a podcast platform or some type of a talk show environment where it feels more like the time and place to do it instead of this way, I don't know. It was just sad because even the footage itself was just word for word, basically what was said in the interview.
It's what makes
to the
it
point where
Helwani
even, he got blocked for doing this. They stopped him, but he put the voiceover over what we were watching. So I don't know what I do think at the end of the day, it was an attempt to sort of plug into a lot of what's going on in the wrestling zeitgeist or whatever. Like, and I think the Dustin Rhodes thing was that too. It reminds me, and that I thought that was harmless, but it reminds me of the way that back in the day when WWF was, even going back to the 80s and 90s, where like the other wrestling companies would try to do things like that, where they would book angles and storylines, right, that were based on things that happened in the WWF because they knew that's what everybody was watching.
Or WWF, fake Diesel and fake Razor when the NWO
was they did it in reverse, right? No, very true.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's what's just so puzzling. It's like Punk says what he says, and then Tony Khan, I guess, feels the need to sort of like respond and say, no, here's what really happened, and shows this video, and nothing about that video contradicted anything that Punk said. And what's more, in terms of the business logic of it, and my kids were watching this, and again, not being wrestling fans, and they my older son had the same take, that like all that did was sort of strengthen the CM Punk character that we have now, which is the guy who isn't going to take crap from anybody. And and my son remembered Drew McIntyre getting in Punk's face on night 2, and what he do? He pulled his leg out and beat him up. And that is the CM Punk character that is a baby face and that is really over because of that. And what did we see? We saw him get in the face of somebody, and this is how it's portrayed.
We also couldn't hear what was happening, which was a big detriment. You couldn't hear what was being
said. But I think you there was body language, and I think the body language was, Jungle Boy had something to say. I thought Punk confronted him. Was it aggressive? Was hostile? Sure, but it wasn't violent. It was
okay. But Al, he struck him, like he pushed him twice.
Yes, right.
He hit first,
but that's not the point.
But it is
like who is in the right and who is in the wrong. It's the business sense. Who comes out looking good in a pro wrestling company? Punk looks like the alpha. He made a
he does. It was a really bad idea to show this video for several reasons, but I had to push back a little bit on the idea that this lined up perfectly with what Punk said. No, it did not, because he went up and this escalated very quickly. Even not hearing what's said, he shoves him again, he grabs him. First of all, the appearance on the podcast, I just choked him out a little bit. Like, come on, that's an absurd thing that you're a 45-year-old man. This is not your first, literally not your first rodeo, in that you got in a fight before backstage with people at this company. You are allowed to keep your job because pro wrestling is pro wrestling. Like, I'm not saying he didn't have a beef with Jungle Boy. The Jungle Boy was justified in what he did. But it's worth noting that, if we want to talk escalating with words, that story of where the whole real glass thing came from, the reason that Jungle Boy said that on Wembley to begin with, the only reason the public knew about it is because someone from Punk's camp leaked that story about the issue with the glass behind the scenes. And like, why were they trying to do this? That was not public information. Punk's camp leaked it.
Right.
So I'm like historically the biggest CM Punk defender, but come on, no, he still looks like a creep in all this. But this was a terrible idea to show the video because it wasn't so wildly different from what he said. And ultimately it makes it look like the company reacted to something relatively small, which if you divorce it from all the other context, it is. They didn't draw attention to the fact that at the end of the clip that Punk is over in what seemingly Tony Khan's face.
Yeah.
So like he's like getting up in the boss's face and screaming at him. They didn't draw attention to it. So the Young Bucks themselves try to downplay it. They try to make it part of an angle. I think the thing is, if you wanted to respond to it in some way, you don't need to show the clip. Let people use their imaginations. This isn't convincing anybody anyway. Nobody saw this and thought Punk was in the right. Now thinks he's in the wrong, or vice versa. Right? So there was no reason to actually show it. It ends up, like Brian said, kind of looking like this desperate ploy to get attention, especially when you couple it with something like, yes, okay, we also have a Rhodes brother challenging our Samoan world champion in the main event of our show. Not to be like, I know it wasn't exactly that, like Dustin Rhodes' birthday is today. There was attention around the family in a positive way. I probably wouldn't have done that title match, but you could have done it at some point, but doing it right after WrestleMania, after the super well-received thing, does seem like you're trying to kind of glom on to the glory that WWE had from this week, and not in a good way.
And to be honestly, if they were going to do it, I would say, like, go all the way with it. Either do it or don't. Like tease people, because it was non-title. Tease people if you're gonna do this. Tease people with the idea that both Rhodes brothers could become.
Oh, you're right. It wasn't eliminating the match
in the same week. Yeah. Like that would get me to watch. You know what I mean? Like at least go all the way with it. It was very wishy-washy the way they did it. Yes.
I'm so interested in your take, Kevin, because I think it gets to sort of like why I think this was such a bad idea, because the inclination by some, and I think by Tony, is to use the video to show who was in the right and who was in the wrong. And you're right. There's no defending Punk putting his hands on this guy. He was in the wrong in doing that. He's the one who made it physical. I think the bigger point is it doesn't matter. Who cares? I mean, this wasn't out there the bigger point shouldn't be like to litigate who was right and who was wrong. And this is why I think this really made Punk's a point. AEW's priority should be making money, right? And they came off looking so impotent in all of that CM Punk, the star of the other company, manhandled your guy, right? And then kind of like blew his lid off. And what was the reaction? I'm scared for my life. And a lot of people, I think, saw it and said, what were you scared for your life? This is just a hothead, blowing off some steam. And he is a hothead. And you could even defend firing him for that, because you can't have that in your locker room. But it just made AEW look so incredibly bad. And then to have it's also puzzling. And to have the ones who are defending Jack Perry be the Bucks, who are the EVPs, but are also playing heels. So the heels are defending, are representing AEW, the cowardly heels. I mean, it almost feels like, going back to the 90s, the problem with the NWO was that they made WCW look so incompetent, right? And that they couldn't they were the baby faces, but they were completely ineffective. And that's how that was my takeaway, that AEW Punk is right. They don't know what they're doing. This is Bush League. To
the point that there was a CM Punk chant during the main event, which is completely not what you want to happen. No. I even think I think the Bucks characters, the way they are, without having done what they did last night, is a good compromise for the people, with FTR as sort of the proxies for the CM Punk fans who stuck around, right? So you can do that, and you can kind of appeal to that crowd without making it look like, oh, we lost the guy you really like. You can just remind them of what they do like, and we're gonna, in the same way that WWE made certain appeals after Bret Hart was gone, like, oh, like we're gonna do this with the Hart family or that.
Yep.
And you try and appease people to an extent, but the way they did it was just, it was never going to be a good idea to show it. The only way it was going to be a good idea to show it, maybe, arguably, even then I would argue not do it on TV, would be if it was this slam dunk open and shut case. CM Punk is just completely losing it, putting other people in danger, very visibly so, very visibly not just an aggressor but a bully.
Even then, I don't know. I mean,
I wouldn't show it on TV. No, maybe not at all.
You show the video if Punk lost the fight. And I didn't.
There's an argument for
AEW, but like, why would you want to show the competition beating your guy up?
I agree. It was ill-advised on many levels.
Yeah, and again, just in terms of like tone deafness, you do this after WWE set all kinds of records over the weekend, back-to-back nights. They are as big league as you can get, and AEW, as it does most weeks now, opens on a very like controlled camera shot where you can only show a very small portion of the building because most of the building is empty. You're talking a building that is probably 2/3 empty or more. AEW is not hot right now, and it is not the time to pull something like this. And then to have I think it was a segment after that, Will Ospreay come out and say what he did, which I thought was just, it's so reeked of like 90s, it was just classless. A response to something that Triple H said that wasn't necessarily even aimed at Will Ospreay. It probably was, but he did it diplomatically. And saying, hey, you only got your job because you're grinding on the boss's daughter, was so just lowbrow 7th grade nonsense. I thought it made him look terrible.
It was cringy. Sorry, Brent. So look,
no.
Just this is where, because I've had people in my Twitter mentions, I've had Triple H defenders just come. I had to mute it because it got to be too much. The substance of what he said, like, terrible. Just really, I'm not a fan of those types of promos anyway. I think, again, the argument goes that he probably could have gone on Busted Open Radio and said it, or come on up any number of podcasts, or done an interview with Sports Illustrated and said it. However, it is disingenuous to suggest that Triple H did not make that comment specifically about Will Ospreay as one of a few different wrestlers, but
he was part of the camp. It might have also been Sasha Banks. It might have also been
because he's talking about people who are young in their trying to make a name for themselves. He's not going to say that about Sasha Banks. He could arguably say that about Okada, but he did use the word younger. Ospreay's 30. You could say it about Jay White, but Jay White signed months ago, so that's not what he was right. Like it's Ospreay. It's just
it was him. Yes, I think.
What's that?
No, I said I think it definitely was aimed at him.
It absolutely was. They were upset that they lost the bidding war, and it was a very bitter comment.
Yeah,
and
I think he wanted him. He definitely wanted him. You could tell even from what he said there that it was like he was trying to make himself feel better about not getting him.
Yeah, that woman's not that hot anyway. Right. I don't care that she turned me down.
But there's two things I want to say. One thing is on that, but first I want to go back to the Punk thing because I want to be clear here. I'm not, when I make these comments in defense of Punk or whatever, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to whitewash the guy or make him out to be this paragon of level-headedness and all that. No, he's not. He's a prima donna. He can be very petulant, self-righteous, difficult to work with. I think at times, in both companies, we've seen that happen. I think the issue here is that this was never handled the right way. The problem is the reality, and I tweeted something like this, that's now I'm getting 18,000 people telling me, why my opinions are wrong or right, which is wonderful always on an afternoon. But these things do happen in locker rooms and in pro sports environments. And so I think sometimes it's a little obtuse when people try to make it out like it's, this is just like at my job. If I was in the break room and I punched someone in the face, I would be fired and blah, blah, blah. This is not Dunkin' Donuts. These things happen in this kind of environment. We've worked in locker rooms. We've seen, you can sometimes have volatile situations. It happens. You don't want it to happen. It's not like, yay, you don't want it, but it's part of the environment, and not to mention the fact that there are situations, regardless of what people say, even in regular people jobs, where you could have a physical altercation and the boss smooths it out and nobody loses their job and you figure out how to move forward with it in some jobs. But this is not that type of job. I'm not saying you just walk around smashing people in the face. But what I am saying is you have to be prepared that these things will happen from time to time, and you have to be prepared on how to put the fires out, deal with it, get the situations under control, instead of having this idea that, well, this should never happen because these people are coworkers and all this kind of thing. That's just not the reality of what this is. So you have to be prepared to deal with it in a real world kind of way. And I think that was never done. And so when you have a personality like Punk involved, it got so completely out of control and crazy in the sense of like the animosity and the tension that it came to this ridiculous head. And I think that's a big part of the problem of all of this stuff. So again, I'm not exonerating Punk, but I am saying that this should have been handled in such a better way, where at the end of the day, they could have and would have been able to hold on to him, which I think was very important. Right. And they blew that. That's the problem.
And I think that's like the big takeaway of this whole thing is that it's really not about, the conversation today and last night after that segment about inevitably, completely predictably, is not about CM Punk and what he did and how he behaved. It's about AEW. It's about AEW, their decision to air that video. Tony Khan's in that management, which was one of the points that Punk made, that for months he was telling him, do something, be a boss, and he couldn't do it. Again, the part that I think is sort of the most pathetic of all, I as much as I would disagree with it, I would respect AEW and Tony Khan more if they said, if Tony Khan said, this Wednesday night, I'm going to show that video, you're going to see what actually happened, and you're going to get my side of the story, the end. And people would have attacked that as being a bad idea. This isn't the time. So what does he do? He presents it under the guise of, this is storyline advancement. It's not just that we want to show the video. It's that this is a critical part of the storyline between the Bucks and FTR, which was just nonsense. They just sort of like retconned the whole thing to make it like, oh, well, this is why we lost about it. It was just, it's pathetic.
Can I say something about the Ospreay thing too? Because that was my other thought that I had when we were talking about that. My problem with what they did there, more than anything else, is that, and I got the sense from it that was more his idea. Like, that was the vibe that I got, is that he probably went and asked Tony Khan, like, can I please have, I don't think it was Tony Khan that said, I want you to go out there and respond to this. I think it was him saying.
Keller reported that it was the other way around, but I mean, it's one report earlier.
Tony Khan
that it wasn't Ospreay's idea, that he was approached by someone from.
Oh, wow. Okay. No, I'm surprised by that. But I'm surprised by that, because that felt like it was him saying, like, just give me a minute in my promo to respond.
I think that's what most of us felt. Who knows where the truth lies, but that's.
But I think my biggest issue with it was that what it did was draw more attention to the situation and the critique that was made against him to people who, many people there probably didn't even know what he was talking about.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they will now, because they're going to try and
figure out. What was it that Triple H said?
Right. What was that? What was he responding to? Well, now I know what Triple H said about him. And that just felt Bush League to me to do. Unprofessional to kind of handle it that way, in a way, especially because he was never mentioned by name. And I think
but neither was Triple H, Brian. Like, you can infer.
No.
But
beyond that,
who else was he talking about? Who else was he?
And also, it was the comments that Ospreay made in response were much more objectionable. Let's put it this way. Let's put it this way. What the comments that Triple H made would not be enough to get punched in the face. The comments that Will Ospreay made,
he did essentially call him lazy, though, Brian. Like,
not really. I mean, what he said was, there are some.
Well, he questioned his work ethic. He definitely did. Question his work.
Yeah, he said, if you're not up for the grind, we don't want you here anyway.
Yeah, he questioned his work,
which ethic. I think is fine for a guy in Triple H's position to say.
It's also insane to say that
we
about
want a
Will
certain
Ospreay.
kind of person.
Have you seen Will Ospreay's work? Like, and I know you have.
Right.
Like, and not just how hard he works in the matches, how far he travels, how many different promotions he works for. He had that time when he was supposed to be winding down from New Japan. Instead of just kind of coasting, resting on his laurels, he's like, I'm going to go work a pay-per-view at TNA, and I'm going to work a TV taping the day after. I'm going to go and work at Rev Pro and put this guy Michael Oku over to the moon.
Yeah.
Like he's not a rest on his laurels guy. He's not a late. No. And we've talked about him before. Like, I'm not the biggest Will Ospreay fan in terms of his like in-ring work. I'm not the one who's like, oh my God, he can do no wrong. But like, that was very, very obviously directed at Ospreay individually or Ospreay as one of two or three people. There's not a world in which you can pretend that was not directed at
Absolutely. Ospreay. But again, like with the Punk thing, it isn't about what Triple H said. It today is about what Ospreay said.
Yeah, I don't think TV was the right. Yeah, I agree.
Right. It's not about how valid Triple H's take was or not. It was, that's really low class on Ospreay.
I think the reason I get so rattled with this particular take, and I agree, like, it shouldn't have been on TV. It should have been a similar forum. But Triple H said it on the Pat McAfee podcast, which was technically TV, but it wasn't WWE TV. So I get the argument. But the reason I get so bothered by that is because it's fundamentally an attack on someone who has been working hard for more than a decade, not being allowed to work a lighter schedule when they have shown that they are valuable even while working a lighter schedule.
Like, that wasn't even his defense. His defense wasn't, hey, that's not true. I work really hard. His defense was, oh, you just got your job because you slept with Stephanie.
No, but it was the first half of the promo. So I think the issue is because he said that thing at the end, that's all you're taking away from it. The first half of it is, oh, I don't grind, mate. And then he starts talking about,
yeah, you're right. Maybe you could
I've been over here doing this. I fly back and forth every week. I'm in England. I'm in
That
Japan.
should have been it. I still don't think it should have been on the show, but that should have been it. Like, it got a little too personal. I understand being insulted about your work ethic, but it felt like he went a lot further. I mean, talking about your wife and how you got your job, like that was like just too far,
I agree it was too much, but we also can't say, oh, Triple H didn't even mention him by name, and he was just minding his own business. Get the hell out of here!
It was about Ospreay. Absolutely, it was,
and it was a personal attack, and you can't not call it a personal. No,
I think, like I said, I think he is bitter and annoyed that he didn't get him, because I think he probably wanted him very badly and thought like he could do a lot of great things with him, because he has a track record, or the company has a track record of taking certain people, even that people have said, oh, that guy will never work in a WWE environment. He's too like a great example is Finn Balor, like just pops into my head. And I'm not saying Finn Balor is like the top guy in the company, but he made it work. He made him into somebody that they could do good things with. And I think he saw Ospreay that way too. And I think he's annoyed that he didn't get him. I do think.
And that's another thing is I can't, if there's a common thread throughout all this, I can't believe that AEW's decision to do all the things that they did Wednesday night wasn't at least motivated by some feeling of, I don't know what it is, is it
jealousy?
Yeah, right. I mean, you're just coming off of this monstrous show, and you just dropped how much money on payroll on Ospreay and Mercedes and Okada, and it hasn't made a difference in your metrics. So it just feels sort of petty,
So I think it's doing well with things like pay-per-view buys, pay-per-view sales, which is only part of it. Like you can't make all your money that way unless you're really just charging so much money for pay-per-views like UFC does or something. But even they, will anyway. I think the problem is that these things are, like you said, they're not going to benefit the company taking these shots. It comes across as number two taking a shot at much higher number one.
Yeah,
it doesn't work. And I think there were some good things on the show that nobody is talking about. You have, the Edge and Pentagon match. That was a lot of fun. The Adam Copeland match and Pentagon, where you had him working a style that was a little bit outside of his wheelhouse. You had a lot of stuff at the women's division last night. You had Mina Shirakawa debut in a way that was building off the Stardom show that happened over WrestleMania weekend. And now there's a little bit of new life in the whole Mariah May, Toni Storm interaction. You know, you have some cool things that were going on, but nobody's focused on those because everyone's talking about like the weird work shoot early 2000s internet stuff. It's no good. So I mean, I think people are being a little bit, and not people, you guys, but broadly being a little bit too apologetic for the WWE side, because I think the main difference is where they said it. However, there's no questioning that AEW ends up looking worse in all this. It's not even close.
Yeah. Well, we're 40 minutes in and we haven't talked about, oh yeah, by the way, we just had the
WrestleMania,
the biggest wrestling show like ever.
Let's talk about that
over the weekend. So let's get to it. You know, we got the finish of the story. Brian, we spent the last a year questioning whether or not, you know, they made the right move a year ago by not having Cody win. And now we've got kind of the complete product. So that was one of the things I've been interested in, is revisiting this with you. We don't get Sunday night, which was this incredible release. And I think one of the great moments in wrestling history. I mean, that visual of Cody giving his mother the championship belt in the ring, everybody celebrating, party atmosphere, all the baby faces in the ring, them hoisting up high over his shoulder. And obviously the 2 nights and this incredible storyline and the involvement of The Rock and Steve Austin. And not Steve Austin, the morning who didn't show up.
I wish that would have been even better.
That's what I was waiting
the only
for.
thing missing.
Yes. But Cena, Undertaker, everything else, like this, just this incredible night and this incredible moment. We don't get that if Cody didn't lose a year ago. Now, granted, it would be maybe giving WWE too much credit for planning everything, because we know a lot of this was just happenstance. They got a lot of lucky, you know, a few weeks ago, this wasn't even the main event, right? I mean, this wasn't even going to be what they were doing at WrestleMania. But it's all to say it very much, I think, all worked out in the end.
Well, if you're trying to get me to admit I was wrong last year, I'm not going to, because I still think that was the time to do it. However, yes, this turned into a much bigger deal than it ever would have been. However, I don't think this was all planned that way. I think they fell into this very fortuitously, and I think they really took a chance and they lucked out.
Yes.
Because the stuff we talked about last year, I feel like, you know, I watched this. I don't know why I get so emotionally invested. I don't know these people, but I watched this through the whole year and everything thinking, oh my God, they're going to blow this and Cody's going to be ruined. And he's going to have the same thing's going to happen that would happen in AEW. They're going to boo him out of the building. He's going to look weak. He's crying too much. He's this, he's that. The Rock is too cool, blah, 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 blah. I kept thinking, like, they took so many chances with spoiling him. Yeah. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but it wasn't for lack of trying. You know, I feel like this was in spite of them in a way. But it turned into this amazing thing. I will tell you this. This is all anecdotal stuff, whatever. My wife was crying. My wife does not cry watching wrestling. My wife usually rolls her eyes and walks out of the room. My wife was crying next to me. My son, who, you know, we watched it the next morning because, you know, my son fell asleep. I wish that I had the wherewithal to grab my phone and record him, because it was like the moment you look and you go, it's like you freeze frame it in a movie and you go, and that's when I became a pro wrestling fan.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, he was floating on air. Cody Rhodes is his favorite wrestler now. They did it. And yeah, I don't think it would have been as big if they did it last year, but they had no way of knowing that they were going to get here. But it was an amazing thing. I said something when it first happened, and I think maybe some people took it the wrong way, whatever, shocking that I was just crapping on the entire history of WWE. But it felt, I've been watching wrestling. I've been watching WWE since the late 80s. This was the most real, genuine, emotional moment I've ever seen. And that's not, I'm not saying there hasn't been any others. That's the thing that people don't understand. This was just the most for me. This exceeded things like Daniel Bryan, which was amazing. It exceeded Randy Savage reuniting with Elizabeth, which was like, oh my God, this is real. It exceeded Eddie and Chris Benoit, which of course, as we know, is so terribly tainted. But these were all moments at the time where you felt like, oh, I'm feeling something real. This was beyond that. Like my wife said, this is like watching a boxing match, like the end of a boxing match, the things you see and the attitudes and stuff. I think a big part of that is Cody too, because I think like he has this unique way, and maybe this is why people will forgive him everything and love him. He has this unique way of like punching through the phoniness of wrestling or whatever and giving you these genuine, real responses of his passion and dedication and how much all of this means to him and how he's not going to follow the usual script of how these things are done. He's going to, but at the same time, not coming across as someone who's just a mark for themselves or a mark for the business. Like he walks this fine line people love. I've been proven wrong at every turn. The people never turned on him, no matter how I felt like he was looking so weak and sad. They never did.
And
I think
in Philly, I mean, if like the fans don't get more rowdy than Philly fans, and they were with him.
And I thought on night one they were slightly more hostile towards him than night two. I don't know what was going on
when he blocked the people's elbow.
Yeah, I think it was also people were just cold and grumpy. I think that was part of it.
Sure.
But like they I don't want to ramble, but they just really nailed it in the end in getting the kind of response they wanted. And like I said, the people have been with him every step of the way. I think I also have to accept and this is what I was hoping for. It's not like I'm disappointed, but it's unexpected to me. And I think it's because I'm from a different time, and I'm not like, this is a very different fan base. If this was the Attitude Era, he would have been shredded through a wood chipper by now, about 12 times over by the fans. This is just a different fan base. It's a different vibe. It's a different time in the business, and it's like he's the perfect guy for this time right now. That's my soapbox thing.
And it goes to, I think, this bigger conversation about this new era, what they were talking a lot about, and I don't doubt that. Under Vince McMahon, this could have gone a lot differently, because I think for so long there was that inclination of, pull the fans, the rug out, under fans, and this reluctance always to give fans what they want, and this was just complete fan service, send everybody home happy, and you're right. I mean, like coming out of the show, and I was there both nights, loved it, and it's easy in the moment to like heap too much superlatives on something, and I've gone to maybe 1,000 wrestling shows in my life. I haven't gone to wrestling shows for close to 40 years, and it was this was the greatest thing I've ever seen. But then you also have to like put yourself back. It's like that's a lot to say, but I remember anything bigger, and again like an emotional climax. And I thought to the same moments that you did, and the reason why this was so unique and maybe will never be duplicated again was because it's not just, you talk about long-term stories, it's not just the 2-year plus story arc with Cody since he came back, and you could go back further than that. You could go through the founding of AEW, the creation,
and they did go
Cody leaving, and the entire genesis of the bloodline, and go back further than that to Roman Reigns' failed babyface run. Everything climaxes in this one moment, but take on top of that Dusty Rhodes and Dusty Rhodes' entire career. So you take, because Cody made that the mission statement on his second night back with WWE, I'm going to get the belt that my dad never could. So now you've got 50 years of storyline added to that with Dusty. It's so much, in this bowl on Sunday night, and they just executed it to perfection. I've heard some people quibble about like, oh, did you really need Cena and Undertaker and all this stuff? It distracted from it. I loved it. I thought it went with the theme of this being a new era, and it sort of being a love letter to WWE and all things WWE, and sort of celebrating 40 years of WrestleMania. I wish Steve Austin was there too. One thing that would have made it perfect. But otherwise, I don't think this could have gone any better. It was it's hard to like explain this to non-wrestling fans because it's pro wrestling, but it was beautiful. It was this incredible, beautiful moment on Sunday night.
Right. And it's funny, like to go back to my poor wife's reaction. I always bring her up, but like my wife at times has said to me things like, I don't know why these guys make such a big deal out of I won this and I did that, and why do the fans care and get so emotional when they're not actually winning anything? It's that classic like non-wrestling fan reaction, right? But in that moment, even she got it. In that moment, she understood. Yes,
Cody Rhodes is real.
Nobody beat anybody. Yes, we get it. It was, they were told ahead of time. Fine. But this is a real moment. There's something real happening here. It's not the same as a competitive sport, but there's something real that is happening in this moment that they put together. As far as the overbooking goes of it, and I'm not saying it was overbooking, but I'm usually not in favor of that sort of thing. And I've said that on here, like the too much going on, the hat on top of a hat and all that kind of stuff. But I felt like there's a time and a place for everything in wrestling. And if there was ever a time, it was this. And for me, it was very simple. This was the culmination of all that, those years and years of how nobody could ever beat this guy because he had so much help, right? So it's like the story here was, oh, well, this is your number's up tonight. You're going to send out Jimmy Uso? I got Jey Uso. Oh, wait, here's Solo Sikoa? I got John Cena, who he just beat in the last match and who can't stand this guy. Oh, you're going to send out The Rock? Guess what? Here's The Undertaker. You're not winning tonight. I don't care who you send out here. I have another piece on the chessboard to go against you. So I felt like that was the whole story, the counteracting of this horrible, horrible outside interference that has supported this evil champion for so long. Like, now your number's up. There's nothing you can do tonight that's going to make you win this time. So that's why I was okay with it.
It's the comeuppance that the NWO should have had, right? That we never got, right? I mean, that's exactly it was. Yes, finally somebody took down the bloodline, and it was all these guys who had and again, this part they do get credit for, that they planted the seeds with Cena and Solo going back several months. That when Cena comes out, there was an issue there, less so with Taker and The Rock. That's why that would have been a great spot for Austin.
I think the stadium would have collapsed if Stone Cold Steve Austin came out at that moment with The Rock.
And I saw a couple of people suggest on Twitter something to the effect it would be harder to clear Austin's massive presence out of the ring. Like Undertaker can kind of just like he can slink into the background a little bit. But it's I think how well this was received, it's a huge testament to Cody's authenticity. And I mean, he's tapped into the best parts of why people loved his dad during this run, especially, over the last year and a half since he returned from injury. And it was, Brian, I talked to you about this a little bit, and I think I was like very cranky at the time. It was my 7th wrestling show in 4 days, all over the place.
Blame you, Kevin. It's okay.
But what's that?
I don't blame you. I understand.
You don't blame me. Yeah. So like I don't have a problem with all the finishes, but I was so excited to see Cody have his moment. I want it to be done perfectly. And I think for the most part, it was done brilliantly. The aftermath, after the match was more than I could have ever hoped for or would have ever hoped for. But if I had the quibbles, it is like, yes, Undertaker, he didn't fit. You could have had, granted, they don't have the tie-in with The Rock necessarily, but you could have had Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens come out. They're more emotionally relevant to Roman Reigns. I think Seth coming out was good. I think it was very, very, very silly that the Shield music comes on and then he comes out in the little costume.
Well, I've heard theories about that we never saw who he meant that chair for. So, did that plant the seeds that he actually came out there to help Roman? And
I mean, that's interesting, but like, why? But why the? Like he made time for a costume
reason for the Shield music, because
that would be the only
the Roman.
That would be the only explanation. I hadn't thought of that, but it'd be the only explanation for why they had Roman take him out so quickly. Because that felt weird. It was like, boy, you're not even going to give him a chance to do anything. Like it barely even registered that he was there before he was out. And it would explain it if the idea was they didn't want to hint either way as to whose side he was on. And maybe Roman assumed that he was there against him and not for him. But I don't know. That was a little, how that was handled was a little awkward. And I think there were fans disappointed that it wasn't him and Moxley.
Right. You play that music and you expect to see him both, and place would have gotten nuts. Someone is just dressed like,
it felt kind of like a cheap nostalgia between him that back to back with Undertaker. I didn't.
Yes.
And again, this is me being like a perfectionist, but
no, I think you're right. Yeah.
After 7 shows in 4 days and watching some other stuff, it was just like man, they didn't have to. And I was fine with the number of run-ins with all that. I think Seth being there Also, it's just the classic WWE, like, kind of assuming that the audience are idiots. Like, remember they were in the Shield together? Like, no, he's going to come out. He's Seth Rollins. Like, we know. And you could have had the exact same thing where Roman's takes the, like, I've heard the explanation that, oh, he's still angry at Seth for the Shield breaking out. Look, they said that 2 years ago during their feud. I didn't buy it then. It just didn't feel, it felt like a way to make them have a match at the Royal Rumble. Like, it was not, there wasn't a lot of storyline to support that, but whatever. So
the Austin thing, that would have been really something beyond. That would have taken it to a whole other level. And I think it's easy, really. I mean, honestly, it's pretty simple. You have him come down. You know, The Rock has to get that complete wide-eyed, terrified 1999 expression on his face. Austin comes out, gives him a couple of stunners, and then they brawl to the back, so they're out of the equation. And now you got the two guys in there. You know what I mean? It could have been done. I'm wondering. I would love to know the story. It had to be what they wanted.
Oh yeah,
I mean, why that didn't happen.
Have been made. Yeah.
It was still. I mean, still great. I mean, it's not. This is me in a very cranky state, being like, why'd you have to like do the cut? Like it just. It took me out
well, because the only other alternative to this, which maybe might have made other people happy or who didn't like to see all the run-ins, the only other way you could go with it, which I don't think would make as much sense storyline wise, and you run the risk of people just rolling their eyes, is if you have Cody somehow able himself alone to counteract all these people interfering and take them all out single-handedly.
Which is tough.
It would make him into this Superman, which I don't know. You run the risk of people going like, "Oh, give me a break," you know,
like that time when Cena faced 10 guys or whatever it was.
Right,
it becomes a little much. Yeah,
I mean that's your other alternative, you know.
I think it was fun. I think it was still good. It was just if I was guess thinking, man, I wish they'd just had Seth come out in his normal stuff and not gone for the cheap pop.
Yeah.
But that's quibbling. It's like, it's overall really good 2 nights of wrestling. I think the night one main event dragged a bit for my taste.
But it didn't need to be 45 minutes. It's the first time I can remember that the night 2 was better than night 1. Yeah. But you know, interesting question. You know, and this gets to sort of like what makes a good wrestling card, and even beyond that, what makes a good fight card. And really, you know, boxing's always been about the one match, right? And nobody even sticks around for this stuff. And with wrestling, less so. You know, I think you do have expectations up and down the card. But was that match, was that climax enough to make this an all-time great WrestleMania? And not that it was by itself, because night 2 in particular, top to bottom, was a lot of fun.
I also thought night 1, I don't know, you're asking me or Kevin? I don't want to.
Either.
Okay. I thought, well, let's not shortchange night 1, because Sami Zayn and Gunther, I thought was outstanding. I thought Rhea Ripley and Becky Lynch might have been the best in terms of like pound for pound in the ring, move for move, you know, from the Meltzer approach to things.
It was very good. Yeah.
Was probably the best match on night 1. You know, so I mean, there were a lot of reasons to call this a very memorable WrestleMania. Like, it's hard to say coming out of it. It's very like I remember walking out of the Astrodome in 2001, and it was very easy to say, "Oh, this is the greatest WrestleMania ever." And then in later years, you have people going like, actually, I think it kind of was. You know, It's one of those things where it takes a little time. I think it's safe to say it's one of the greatest. It was one of the most memorable, and I think it was one of those shows that can and definitely is buoyed up by what's going on at the top being, I mean, you know, another example of that is the first WrestleMania. I mean, God, I mean, of course, we're light years beyond that at this point, but
like Tito and the Executioner.
I mean, that card was maybe the best example ever of that, where that was a 1-match card. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's like everybody remembers that. I mean, if you had Wendy Richter with Cyndi Lauper, you know, that was like the part B of it. But I mean, this was a good example of a show where I fully feel that based on this one storyline and the angles and the double main event, it carried the show, and I mean that in a good way. Like it really lifted the show to another level, which is a fine thing to have. Like if something on top is that hot, that you know that it can carry. The Daniel Bryan Mania, I felt was carried that way too, and that's fine.
Right. What did you all think of Seth and Drew? I thought a lot of fun. I mean, it was a great way to start off night 2, and it was just bang, bang, bang. Literally,
I was amazed. Hit,
hitting Claymore.
I was amazed being there, Al. That like, And at first I didn't know if it was the best thing because nobody was booing anything. And then I thought, no, that's a good problem to have, because basically you had people loved Seth. They would have been perfectly happy for Seth to retain. Drew wins. They're happy for Drew. He got his moment. Damian Priest comes out. They're even like, oh, we're going to see Money in the Bank cash in. And like, then he does it. And then they're ready to cheer him. And they cheered Punk when he attacked Drew. So you have 4 acts who they were like, none of them could have done anything wrong. They could have gotten beat up, beaten somebody else up, and the crowd would have gone crazy for it. So like to open the show up like that, that's one of the better WrestleMania openers I can remember.
And again, this new kind of fan-friendly approach is also about being predictable, because my kids thought I was brilliant, because I was like, here's what's going to happen. Drew's going to win. He's going to get in Punk's face. Punk and him are going to get into it. Punk's going to knock him out. Damian's going to cash in. And it happens exactly. And they're like, wow, how'd you know that? And I called it exactly the same for the main event, with all the run-ins, minus, swap out Steve Austin for The Undertaker. But that's good, right? I mean, at its best, it's like it should be predictable. It was, one of my kids brought up, like, this was, this kind of goes more back to the main event. It was Infinity War and Endgame, right? I mean, and night one was about, bringing.
Are these friends of yours, down. Infinity War and Endgame? I don't know these.
Night one was Thanos killing everybody off, right? And you knew that night 2 was the Avengers all come back, and so. Entirely predictable, but super satisfying.
Well, I'm proving that I'm the worst predictor of wrestling, no matter how long I've been watching this thing. Like, I can tell you within a good 10 seconds when a finish is coming. Like, I have that sixth sense.
Yeah.
But I can't predict the damn thing, because, like, I mean, night 2, everybody was expecting those in a good way. Like, if people wanted to see all that, and I could see that coming. But the thing with Damian Priest, I remember feeling going into it, like, I don't know how the hell are they going to fit this guy in. I almost started feeling like maybe they're just going to give up on this Money in the Bank thing, because I'm thinking they're not going to have him cash in on Cody. Like, that's not happening. And then I started thinking, like, well, he's been nowhere near any of this. He hasn't been even being positioned as a world title contender or anything. Like, is he going to cash in on Drew as soon as he wins it? And then the minute Punk was out there, though, then I thought to myself, oh, that's how they're going to do it. That's how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Punk is going to somehow, do what he did and make him open to it. So then now you can go in that direction. Now you can continue the Drew and Punk storyline.
But like, crucially, there was Drew and Judgment Day stuff going on a few months back as well, into last year at this point, I guess. But
right. There's also the foreshadowing of them losing the tag championship in the first night. So now Damian is free and clear to move on to something else. And I know we got a hard out at 2:00. So the next night, not necessarily talking about Raw, but kind of talking about the direction, where do they go from here, and the discussion of this new era, which I think is so interesting. I mean, I went to a Raw, not this past Monday, but the previous Monday in Brooklyn, and I guess they had done it the week before too, but it was the first I noticed the disappearance of the Titantron. And it kind of goes back, I think, to the AEW discussion too, which might be kind of like a subtle or not so subtle dig at AEW, where you guys can't have enough things to block your audience or more production tricks. We're getting rid of our screen so you could see the size of our crowd, and how you just, which I think is great. And I think it's a great look for WWE. There's some logistical problems with not having a screen there. I mean, they had to wheel in the 5th grade cart with the VCR so Cody could see the video on Monday night.
Yeah,
so
but most arenas have their own screens. They may not be giant.
It's complicated, and very often that screen is part of a storyline when there's a back and forth, which is goofy. So I don't mind losing that. But
I was just about to say that's a blessing.
Look, I'll say, I've been calling for that for years, to just shrink that whole thing, because it just screams to me like, hey, we can't fill this building. Like that. That's what it screams to me. And the thing about it was, like, I was working there at the peak of the Attitude Era, just when it started to tilt down. And I could tell you for a fact that was why it became so popular, was why the sets were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because the crowds were getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it just stands to reason that now that they can fill a building, why in the world wouldn't you want to put 20,000 people in the building if you can?
It also subsidizes other, ticket buyers. So,
right. You can
I pay less. Yeah.
Yeah, you can deal with the screen issue. You work around it. You write around it. Like you were saying, you don't have as many segments that revolve around somebody talking to a giant screen. Like there's ways around it. It's worth it to me to do that. I thought, that doing that, especially with the night 2 and everything, like it really worked. It really, the entrance, I thought it was kind of neat how they can wrap, now that they have those LED screens, they could literally wrap them around the natural barricades of the arena so that they're just walking out of what is essentially the locker room door or like a construct around it. And it doesn't look bad. It looks fine. I thought it.
I like it. It looks more human to me because you see them go through that door and you have.
And they look like a bigger deal because they're just surrounded. You see the massive fans surrounding and the spotlight down on one guy.
Yeah.
And another thing, we've talked about if I pop in a VHS tape of wrestling from any time from like 85 to 97, 98, you can instantly know what year you're watching by what the look of the show was. And it's been so long since you could do that because there's been the sameness to WWE for almost 20 years. So I just welcome it looking a little different.
The stagnation of, look, Kevin Dunn, Vince McMahon. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out, right? They got old, they got stagnant, they got set in their ways, they were taking the safe path of what they were comfortable doing.
Yeah.
And now everything's getting shaken up. Like one thing I want to say, and I know the time's limited, but I am doing cartwheels over the fact that we're calling it professional wrestling again.
Yeah.
This was like the greatest dream that I never thought would happen. It's certainly great for the branding of our magazine, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But
we don't have to go back to that big just PWI on the cover like we had for a few years there.
Scrap the plans
let's
for
not talk
Entertainment
about that.
Illustrated.
Let's not talk about.
No, but I like when Michael Cole is saying, I damn it, I love professional wrestling. Like they're going out of their way. And what did Corey Graves say? Pro wrestling is back. Like those were the last lines of WrestleMania.
It's the best.
It's great to see. And I want to I have one response because there have been people that I've seen saying things like, well, it's silly for them to say that because it's still sports entertainment. Like you see a match like the Cody Roman match, like that's sports entertainment to me. And how is that pro wrestling? My response to that is very simple. The term sports entertainment was ridiculous and dumb from the beginning because all it ever was professional wrestling. All of that stuff that Vince McMahon has been doing for the last 40 years, the gobbledygooker, the fake Undertaker, think of the most outrageous and nonsensical. That's all still under the umbrella of professional wrestling and what it is. There are so many different things that pro wrestling can be. It's just that this guy with all his weird hangups just didn't want to call it what it was. It's not necessarily, he amped up all of the antics and shenanigans and things, certainly did, but it's still always been professional wrestling. It's just, he just decided to call it this other thing and was hoping that everybody would fall in line, but it's just his version of pro wrestling. That's all it ever was.
I also heard belt a lot over the
I heard it Monday night.
Yeah. Which it took you a minute for me to even catch it. Like, did he call it a belt?
The object is the belt. The object is the belt. The object is the belt.
Yeah.
The Rock was saying, "Oh, you're making fun of my fake belt. It's not a fake belt."
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Real quick, more immediately, where do they go from here in terms of what do you do with Cody now? Do you assume that they do they run back Roman? Is there a rematch, which I feel like you should do? Right.
I think you got to give Roman some time to cool off, though, right? After that loss, you got to and have him come back in a big way.
And that's the kind of the downside, I guess. It's a good problem to have, but that was such a high and so much star power, and just the mass, the size of that main event was so big. It's like, do you anything now? It seems like such a come down. Cody versus insert, heel here, heel challenger. How do you get between now and Mania 41? And are we all assuming that Mania 41 is Cody and The Rock?
I don't know. I don't know if you could assume it. It's definitely happening.
Right.
It could be, because nowadays with the way the landscape is, I mean, it could be Saudi Arabia. SummerSlam has gotten huger than ever. It could be that if you don't want to wait till WrestleMania, it could be Mania. I mean, I guess they're going to feel it out. They're doing a lot of this stuff is really slow burn. I feel like the key right now with Cody is give him a chance to kind of be the champion. You know what I mean? Like now that he's done it and he's become it, I think he does need some things that are going to really strengthen his position as the champion. One thing that popped into my head is like, let's say somebody like, for example, Gunther.
Yeah.
And I bring him up because they have a history.
Yeah.
Right. They have a history from the Rumble. In fact, I had assumed last year that he was going to be first up if Cody won the title there. But Gunther is also somebody that can be used as someone Cody can overcome to look stronger than ever. Like, I don't think Gunther is going to beat him for the title. Could be wrong, but he's a great person to plug in as now that Cody is there in that spot. Let us now reinforce that he belongs in that spot rather than just throwing him in with all the bloodline guys again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Kevin? I mean, are there any obvious challengers? Gunther is the one I thought of too. I see Sheamus
is a
back
good one.
and you elevate him.
I'll tell you though that now that you said Bloodline, and I don't know that this is a pay-per-view or a big pay-per-view one, but I really want to see Cody and Jacob Fatu. That would be an excellent. Like from a wrestling fan standpoint, I think that would be a phenomenal match. But is that going to headline summer? No,
well, they could get there. It depends on how they.
It's true.
Somebody.
It is true.
Do you assume that the bloodline is even a thing? I wonder if
it may not be
the end of the bloodline.
Yeah, I think my gut tells me we're going to see the Roman Cody rematch at SummerSlam, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and maybe with a gimmick. I don't know if you do a cage, Hell in a Cell, something like that. Kind of freshen it up. So yeah, it's fascinating. I also don't assume that Cody's keeping this belt all that long. Like they did that with Roman, the 4-year title reign. Cody's the kind of guy who could drop it, pick it back up, drop it, pick it back up. I mean, not saying every month, but you could do a program with Gunther and have Gunther beat him for the title, this summer, and then you run it back and Cody gets it back.
I think as long as he gets a good couple of successful defenses in there, you don't want him to look like a fluke champion after all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this will be answered by the draft. So shuffle some people around. You probably need some more turns too, maybe some, whether it's Seth, turning. There's a lot of ways you go. I'm very interested. Last thing, Kevin, one of the reasons I wanted your perspective here today is because you run a wrestling magazine, and we are allegedly in the middle of a boon and a new era. Does it feel that way? I mean, do you sense we're on the precipice of when the Attitude Era launched, when rock and wrestling in the mid 80s? Does it feel like that?
It's so difficult because everything is so much more niche these days, where you have even things that were just very, very popular before are smaller audiences because there's so many more options for entertainment. But it sure does feel that way in a lot of metrics. And I mean, one of the things is just look at the fact that you have wrestling on every night of the week, essentially. Yeah. You have, AEW, like we talk about it not being hot, and certainly it's not doing as well as it was, but it's still the most successful competitor that there has been in many, many years. You have other competitors who are doing pretty good business. You have, like TNA is not what it was, but it still gets 6 figures in viewership a week on cable. You still have, New Japan is still able to tour globally and do all this. And then this is all just to say that WWE is doing record business in a lot of ways, and in ways that feel more substantial now, whereas they were making a lot of money even during years that were creatively bankrupt, and we're just
artificially,
through just not creative accounting, because they were making the money, but it was through these media deals and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas now it feels like they are putting out a product that actually merits the money they're making.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. So I think the fact that you have pro wrestling consistently, WWE and AEW, and obviously WWE being far at the fore in this regard, but in the top rated shows on cable every week. You have a lot like cable TV is down across the board pretty much, except for live sports and couple select reality shows and pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Like it's I think it builds really well. And you're seeing all these new fans. I was talking to people who said that they were out doing non-wrestling things on Saturday and Sunday, and they saw people on their phones watching WrestleMania. What?
Oh, yeah.
Like would that have happened even a year or two ago?
Yeah, my daughter lives in Philadelphia, and she said that you could it was all over the city. Like you knew there was stuff going on. There was something big happening.
It was everywhere. Yeah. Brian, I know you got to run. So before you take off, anything you want to promote? I might stay behind. I want to talk to Kevin about his show before we run. But anything you want to plug before you got to run?
Sure. I mean, I always like to plug my own podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle. I just had recently a WWE employee roundtable on there as my episode for WrestleMania week, which a lot of people enjoyed. Very candid stuff. And I'm going to be doing another from the archives episode soon. I'm not going to say who it is yet, but I've had interviews with Dusty Rhodes and Bruno Sammartino and Terry Funk, and it's somebody on that level that's going to be coming up soon. So it's SUAW.
You're replaying the episode with me? Is that what you're saying?
I know.
Well, actually, I am going to be putting together a best of very soon, and so I'm going to be picking from a lot of different ones, and you'll probably be in there. But it's SUAWpod.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, feel free to sign off if you got it, Brian. Before we leave, want to talk to Kevin about his weekend and Thrashlvania, the show you promoted on Saturday, right there in the greater Philly area. Bye, Brian.
Bye, guys.
How'd it go?
It was good. We had a fundraising goal of $5,000 and we met it. So
great.
We were raising money for the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. So you've talked on the podcast before. 6 months ago, I lost my wife Megan to cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct cancer. And a lot of people were just very supportive in making this happen between the performers on the show, people who contributed, people who spread the word about it. Shotzi Blackheart's sister actually is currently battling cholangiocarcinoma. And before I know it, like Shotzi was promoting the show. Like she put a couple of posts out on social media. Completely unexpected, but like because this is a more rare form of cancer, it's sort of a more tightly knit community, and it turned out that her sister and Megan had a mutual friend within the community.
Wow.
The wonderful woman named Jan, who kind of like put us in touch, and so it was a lot of fun. It's the thing is with these shows, you hear it's like for a cause and it's kind of serious sounding, but the goal was to have a show that was anything but that, like a lot of fun. Just a lot of independent wrestlers that I am personally fond of, both their work and as people. It was fun to play Booker. I'd never gotten a chance to do that before. I don't expect I'll ever do it again.
Did you have any egos that you had to?
No. Everybody was really pretty great. It was, but I think maybe it's the nature of the show, or they didn't want to make things awkward with me or whatever, but no, it was really pretty good. And
people can still see it, right?
It's on the IWTV streaming service. So you can go to IWTV.live, and the streams do generate royalties, and we're going to be just still donating those royalties going forward for the show to the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation.
Excellent. Super. What else did you see? You said you went to 7 shows and over
oh my gosh. Okay. So I went to the first show I did was the Stardom show on Thursday, which had a surprise appearance from Timeless Toni Storm. She came out after Mariah May's match, which was a reunion with Mina Shirakawa, who we saw on Dynamite, and the reunion of their group. And that kind of kicked off a storyline it looks like they're going to be doing on AEW now. But that was just a very, very good show. There was a title change. The High Speed Championship changed hands to Saki Kashima won it in the first round. That was really fun. I'd never seen a full Stardom card in person because they haven't done a show over here since 2019 in New York, I think it was. But there was that. Thursday night, I went to over to the H2O Wrestling Center where Thrashlvania was or would be, and saw Action Wrestling's Dean. And that was kind of a show that was put together in memory of Dean Rasmussen from the DVD VR forums, which Tony Khan they talk about him being an old message board poster. That was the message board he used to post on.
Mhm.
And Chris Hero was on there. A lot of other people who used to post on that forum. And this guy, Dean Rasmussen, passed away last year, and he was just this very beloved guy, very enthusiastic, helped get a lot of people into different kinds of wrestling from different eras. So this show was put together as a tribute to him, and just had a lot of really interesting matchups. I was actually shooting ringside for that, so there will be a few photos in the next issue of the magazine, Supercards, as well as photos from my show, which Issa Marie took. Let's see, I did that. The next day I went to TJPW, which is another Joshi promotion out of Japan, and Progress Wrestling out of the UK. They both came. They did shows as part of the GCW collective events that run every year in the WrestleMania host city. Those are both a lot of fun. A couple of title changes at the GCW show as well. At the Progress show. I didn't make it to any of the Joey Janela spring break, all that stuff. A lot of that was just kind of like too late at night. I didn't have the energy for it.
It's overwhelming. It's so much. That's why, for a few years there, I did try to catch the indie stuff. Now that I've been going with my family, we keep,
you can't drag everybody all over the place.
And even that. So we did SmackDown in the Hall of Fame Friday night, and we stayed for. I'm really happy they put Heyman on first, which was smart. So we stayed for him, and then left soon after that. Did NXT the next day.
Yeah, how was NXT? I still haven't watched it.
I loved it. I mean, again, wife and kids, not knowing any of them, they were kind of twiddling their thumbs. And I haven't watched NXT all that closely, but it was a hell of a show. Packed a crowd. The Dijak, Obafemi, and what's the guy? Josh Briggs, is that his name? I mean, that might be the best match I saw all weekend. They had just an incredible match. I mean, three big 300-pound guys just beating the snot out of each other. Super fun. So I had a great time. And then both nights of Mania, as people talked about, first night weather wasn't great, but we're kind of old pros now. This is my 16th WrestleMania. So I know we brought hand warmers, we brought blankets, layers, the whole thing. So we were fine.
Yeah, you were ready. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next night was much, much better. Next night was beautiful. We were tailgating. And it
was very nice. Yeah, it was a beautiful day.
So.
And it actually got nicer after everyone left town on Monday. Like Tuesday.
I heard,
Unfortunate how that works, but
a crazy weekend because it began Friday with an earthquake, and then Monday with the eclipse.
I was driving to the TJPW show, I think, when that happened. It was and you saw Julia in person because they showed her in the crowd at the NXT show.
Yeah. And I know, I recognized right away, and told my kids that's Julia.
She's WWE bound. She had a performer lanyard on there. You could see it in her social media, but I mean, everyone knew what was happening. So she'll be a great fit on NXT. Sure. And
surprised that no word of 41. They always announce the next year's Mania. So do you have any sense of what's happening? Is it up in the air, or are they? Because I know that Minnesota was the talk, and the governor has all but said Minnesota. But now
do you think there's some cold feet going on after
I know if it's the WWE's part, because I've heard some discussion that now they're thinking Vegas and the relationship with UFC. So I booked not knowing the city or the date yet. We booked a refundable hotel in Minnesota near the stadium for that weekend already, on the drive back from Philly.
Okay, that's smart. And I mean, you could book the time off work, I guess, or whatever. But it's I mean, but even then, the date, like, it's just like that would be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, you assume it's the first weekend in April,
but then there was an interview, I think, with Nick Khan where he hinted that he wouldn't be opposed to moving it to later in the month.
Yeah,
but I don't know if that would happen next year, but because people are in the habit of going first weekend of April, but.
Yeah, who knows?
I guess we'll see. But it is. I can't remember the last time they haven't had the following year's WrestleMania host city announced.
Yeah. Usually it's before Mania. They'll do it a week or two before Mania, and then they'll have the first video at the show. So that was surprising. Also, I mean, just in terms of like wrapping things up, it did seem to me that outside of that they saved all those WrestleMania moments for that main event, because otherwise it was really just kind of like a card. I mean, you got the Damian Priest cash in, but otherwise it was, there was.
I would argue Sammy.
What's that?
I would argue that Sammy winning was a pretty big deal
Yes,
because it was the end of Gunther's
but in terms of surprise appearances,
oh sure, yeah,
there was none of that. I mean, or very little of it. Bubba Ray's the one that I can remember.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call that
I
on
don't
the
know.
same level. I mean, it
No,
was an appeal to the Philly fans, and it was you know. But
I was a little surprised that they didn't do. When you think about 30 and 20 and all that, I know Hulk Hogan was in town. Hogan, I think, was signing autographs at the World. I didn't know if we'd see him or not, but it really tells you that they sort of like turned a page. That it doesn't mean that much anymore, and I don't know that it would have gotten that much of a reaction. So
no, and I mean the last couple times, I mean he's gotten negative reactions.
Yeah.
If you go back to that Tampa one that you were at, and but it's. Yeah, I can't really think of a. By the way, the Bubba Dudley thing with I mean, it's such a small. It's like the only thing that was kind of a unfortunate botch / awkward moment of the weekend for me was that the table that broke.
Yeah,
Aaron Cross on it, which is they're trying to do the right thing and have a table that breaks safely in a certain spot, but I guess his weight broke through. I'd almost forgotten about that until you mentioned it.
But it was a good card over 2 nights.
Oh yeah, 100%. If that ruins the show for you, I don't know what to tell you. Like that's
Any thoughts on the Hall of Fame? I thought Heyman gave one of the great speeches ever. I thought the rest of it was kind of lackluster. I mean,
I like the class. That's the best thing I would say about it. I think they had a nice mix of people in there. Bull Nakano and Thunderbolt Patterson being someone who didn't really have any WWE connection directly. So it was. You had a good group, and I think obviously Heyman, with it being the ECW country, it makes sense, and he kind of tied together. Well, he didn't really tie together, but he mentioned like I'm proud of my my children, and I'm proud of ECW, and I'm proud of Roman Reigns. And there's another child he probably strategically did not mention because of mentions in a certain lawsuit. But that was overall I think it was just a very exciting week. There was a lot to like. I think a lot of these shows we're mentioning that if people didn't see them, you can go and like the collective stuff is all on Fight TV. It's Triller now. A lot of the other indie shows I mentioned are on IWTV. I say this all the time, but it's a great time to be a wrestling fan. There's so much. If you're like, what, I really don't like this about WWE or AEW or like whatever else. Like there's so many other things out there that you can go check out. There are so many platforms that you can check out that will show. I mean, even if sometimes it's not entirely legal forms, it's very easy to pull up old matches. It's easy to get. Yeah. It's kind of like with music, right? So if you say, oh, there's no good music anymore, or like I miss when music was good, or like it's all at your fingertips. It's just a question of you finding it, and you'll find something that likes you if you look long enough, that you like if you look long enough. And I think wrestling's the same thing. And I think this was overall just a really, really good week for
it does, and it does feel like sort of generationally turning a page, and Triple H talked about that a lot, and even connecting it to like Hogan. And I know this is old news, Hogan not being around, not that he's been a thing, but another thing that I witnessed over the weekend that kind of blew my mind was I briefly ducked into WrestleCon and was just around where they were doing all the autographs. I don't do any of those, but it's interesting to see where the lines are and where they're not. And on Sunday, the Hardys were there together, and they had a good size line. A lot of people there for the Hardys. And then I was chatting with an artist who used to work for WWE. Actually did that. And I have the T-shirt I just wore it the other day. The Survivor Series where Lex Luger is cutting into the turkey. Survivor Series. And he painted that. So we were chatting for a few minutes. He's from Long Island, and then when I walk away from him, I realized that right next to us is Ric Flair at a table with nobody coming around to see Ric Flair, and maybe there was one person. And it blew my mind. And it's like, but it does speak to like, it's like sort of one generation is cleared out and another one. It's all to say that, Cena meant a lot more on Sunday, and this goes without saying, than like a Hogan showing up or a Ric Flair showing up. It's just, it's a generation that sort of aged out, and it's sort of like how relevant Bruno Sammartino would have been in the attitude area, which is to say not at all, right? Yeah, it's fascinating. It does feel like, the beginning of something, and it's exciting. Yeah, it's like I've been through so many of these, been a fan when wrestling's been deader than dead, and you walk into an arena, it's completely empty, and now it's heating up again. So fun time to be working for a wrestling magazine. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, Kevin, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for watching. We will be back soon.